Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This lecture is on surah baqarah, verses 6 and on. And it's following up on the lecture where I talked about the word kufr, which appears in verse 6 of Baqarah. So I'll read a handful of these verses and then try to comment. First in Arabic and then in English. Inna alladhina kafaru sawaun alayhim a anzartahum am lam tundirhum la yu'minun. Indeed, those who kafaru, which again I translated as cover up, put away from themselves, reject. It is the same to them whether you warn them or not you warn them, not do they believe. Khatama Allah ala qulubihim wa ala sammahim wa ala abswarihim ghishawatun wa lahum adhabun azim. God has set a seal over their hearts and over their hearing, and over their vision is a covering. And for them is a great punishment. Wa min al-nas man yaqulu amana billah wa bil yawmil akhir wa ma hum bimu'minin. And of the people, or among the people, are those who say, we have believed in God and in the last day, but not they are believers. Yukhadiyun Allah waladina amanu wa ma yakhda'un illa anfusahum wa ma yashurun. They seek to deceive God and those who have believed, but not do they deceive except themselves, and not they realize. Fi qulubihim maradun fazadahum Allah maradan wa lahum adhabun alimun bima kanu yakdhibun. In their hearts is a disease, so God increased them in disease, and for them is a painful punishment because they used to lie. As in the word yakdhibun here also can mean deny, give the lie to, pretend that something is a lie. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. And when it is said to them, do not spread corruption in the earth, they say, only we are reformers, or you could say peacemakers. أَعْلَى إِنَّهُمْ هُمْ الْمُفْسِدُونَ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. Beware, or you could say unquestionably, indeed they themselves are the spreaders of corruption, but not they realize, or not they perceive. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ آمِنُوا كَمَا آمَنَ النَّاسُ قَالُوا أَنُؤْمِنُ كَمَا آمَنَ السُّفَهَاءُ أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ السُّفَهَاءُ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. And when it is said to them, believe as the people have believed, they say, shall we believe as the fools have believed? Beware, unquestionably, indeed they themselves are the fools, but not they know. So that is verses are ayat 6 through 13 of Baqarah. There's a great deal in those verses, and I won't be able to talk about all of it at all. Some things I do want to talk about, inshallah. I've already spoken about kufr. Looking back briefly at the first 5 ayat of Baqarah, it told us that this book is for those who are seeking protection. And of course, the list of things, characteristics of these people goes on in those verses, but the first one is those who seek protection. So here we hear about those, a very different class of people. And these people are called the aladina kafaru, those who cover up, reject. In this whole passage, and this passage goes on quite a bit, it's very important. One of the main points seems to be that the agency, the responsibility for not believing in God and therefore being lost and blind rests on human beings themselves. And so it's very important not to get confused when it says God sets a seal on their hearts and think, oh, well, it's God who has sealed up their hearts. What can they do about it? Because God very clearly states that the first act, the initial act in this process of being blinded and made deaf and cold-hearted or closed, or having your heart closed, is the act of kufr. And likewise, when we get to some of the other ayat in this passage, like 9 and 12 and 13, the inability of the kafirin, as we call them, to perceive and to distinguish between swali and fasad, between reform, rectitude, doing according to God's will, and corruption. Their inability to perceive those distinctions, and in a nutshell, to perceive the truth, they are themselves responsible for that inability, even though it is at the same time a punishment from God. Because why does the punishment of blindness, etc., come to them from God? Because initially they refused to see. In fact, they covered up what there was to see of the truth. Okay. And so that's emphasized, for instance, in 10, verse 10, for them as a painful punishment, because they used to lie, which again, kadhibun can mean both lie and claim that something that is true is a lie, which in kind of a more archaic English, we should say give the lie to. If you give the lie to someone or something, you're claiming he is a liar or it is a lie, which of course is itself a lie. Another thing to emphasize here is it's very interesting and very important that the focus throughout this passage is not on any spectacular crime. And I've already spoken about this in the other lecture, but it's on crimes that have to do with perception, failure to perceive, and how we respond to the truth. Okay, so we're told right away in the Quran that what we should really be focusing on, above all, is how are we responding to the truth, and on the more or less invisible processes of thinking, listening, seeing, reading, studying, and in a nutshell, perceiving, seeking knowledge. This is where perhaps the crux of the matter of human behavior, human existence lies. And we could cite plenty of other passages in the Quran that would corroborate that view. The other important topic here is the two different classes of people described in this passage, which again continues. Those who kafaru, which is mainly described in 6 and 7, and then a longer description of what later are called the munafiqin, the hypocrites. And that is those who say we believe in God in the last day, but they do not believe. And then the description goes on. So Ishrar Ahmed, the Pakistani Quran scholar, said something very helpful about this group of people, that in the time of Muhammad, there were, and really in any case where there's a kind of revolutionary ideology or movement, there's always three groups of people defined in how, and they're characterized by how they respond to the movement, such as the revelation of the Quran. There are those who will fight on behalf of that movement and will give everything. In this case, that's what we will call the mu'min, the believers, or mu'minin. And then there are those who will fight the movement tooth and nail, fight against it. And that's who we would call the kafirin. But then there's always a third party who want to benefit from the movement and don't want to take on the heavy responsibility of fighting it, but do not want to sacrifice anything on its behalf. And so that, according to Ishaq Ahmed, is this class that we call the hypocrites, munafiqin. So if that is true, it helps us to understand some of the strange behavior described in this passage that they claim to believe, but they really don't. They want to benefit from being one of the mu'minin, and it seems possible, if not likely, that this movement will be successful. And then, of course, it did turn out to be. But they don't want to lose anything. And they certainly don't want to have to fight a war with the kafirin, who, of course, initially were more powerful. So, and what we're told here, too, is that they're not aware. They're trying to deceive God. They're actually deceiving themselves. They're not aware that they are frauds, that they don't really believe. They simply want to benefit from the latest revolutionary movement, which seems poised to change everything and change the whole status quo of their society. And, we can, again, cite many verses in corroboration with this. For instance, I'm thinking of a verse that says, never will you attain to birra, usually translated righteousness, you could translate it perhaps generosity, until you spend from what you love. Unless you're willing to, and there are many verses about loaning to God a good loan. Unless you are willing to sacrifice, to give up things that you love, you are not a believer. You are a hypocrite. But it says here, will not know that about yourself. This is a particularly scary passage to read for anyone who identifies as a believer and who is studying the Quran, like me, like perhaps you, whoever's listening, if you identify like that, how do you know that your profession of belief, and Ishar Ahmed too often translates Aladina Amanu as those who profess belief. Notice Amanu is in past tense. Those who have believed. It's an act of professing belief. It's not the same as Yukmanu in present tense, where you're continually believing, actively believing. So if you have professed belief, how do you know that that was sincere, that you were willing to back it up with sacrifices? I won't attempt to answer that question here, but just to note that this passage is one of the many things going on in this passage is a warning. This could be you. This may be you right now. It might be you in the future. Not to mention a warning that some of the people that you associate might be of this kind. And that could be a warning to Muhammad, and it can be a warning to us. And so this further enlightens ayat 11 through 13. When it is said to them, do not spread corruption, fasad, in the earth, they say, we are only muslihun, we're trying to make peace. I won't go into detail because, again, Ishar Ahmed says this already, and of course much better. Indeed, they are the mufsidun. They're the ones who spread corruption, but they do not realize, they don't perceive. It's part of their curse, part of their diseases. They can't even tell that they are the problem. They're destroying the ummah, the community of believers from within, by asking them to make peace or not fight, telling them to be afraid, to realize you're outnumbered and make compromises, and just to water down the whole sort of institution of belief that God is establishing through Muhammad and his followers. And of course, we see that watering down happening throughout the history of the revealed truth from God, which always devolves into what we call churches. And when it is said to them, moving on, so it's 13 again. And when it is said to them, believe as the people have believed, they say, should we believe as the fools have believed? Indeed, they themselves are the fools, but they do not know. Again, Ishar Ahmed's idea here is that, and I had always read this thinking, they think the believers are fools because maybe they're not educated, they're not powerful people, they're not clever in the ways that they recognize cleverness. And that may be true. But when I heard Ahmed's interpretation, it made a lot of sense that he's saying they especially think they're fools because they're willing to lose everything. And in their mind, they're likely to lose everything. But God is saying they themselves are the fools, because as we know from other verses, al-khasirin, those who lose anfusihim, themselves, that is, of course, those who lose everything. So they are fools not just because they're not smart and wise, but specifically because they are not even aware, or they've made themselves unaware of the real loss to be feared, which is the loss of your soul, which is the punishment of hell. Whereas the so-called fools, the believers, are willing to lose everything precisely because they know, because they are muttaqin, they're ones who are defending themselves, seeking protection from the real loss, the real terror, which is hell. So that brings us, that covers those 7 ayat. Before concluding, what I want to say is that this passage is especially enlightening in part because when we look at human civilization, past and or present, one of the mysteries, apparent mysteries, is how can human beings disagree so absolutely for the whole of history and throughout millennia not have come to an agreement, a consensus, a conclusion about what is true and what is false, what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad, etc., etc. A lot, of course, could be said about this. It's one of the main, I think, arguments that is brought against belief in a single book and a single God and a single truth. Because the idea is truth is not simple, is not single. It varies across cultures and civilizations, and that no one person, no one group or nation has the answer or all the answers. And that in fact, there is no such thing as the truth with a capital T. There are versions of truth, there are perspectives, and that perhaps the greatest truth is that there is no one truth. These are a number of ideas, which of course I won't go into. Well, this passage and the succeeding verses, I think, very deftly, very effectively, and concisely solves this mystery. Why, after all these millennia, why have human beings not arrived at the truth? Why at any given moment in history is there such disagreement among apparently intelligent, educated, well-intentioned people about what is true and what is right? How is it possible that you find such an absolute division between seemingly rational, intelligent people, that one person says the very idea of God is ridiculous, and another person says the idea of the absence of God is ridiculous? And how is it that amongst people that claim to believe in God, there's so much division? Which, of course, is one of the many arguments that non-religious people will bring against religions, is that they can't agree. In fact, they're constantly fighting and starting wars. And there's some justice in that criticism, a lot of justice. So what is the Quran's solution? It's quite simple, I think, according to this passage. Human beings do not know the truth because they do not want to know the truth. It is not that they are blind through God's fault or through the fault of circumstance or genetics. They are blind because they want to be blind. Inna aladina kafaru. It is the same. It's indeed those who cover up, those who hide the truth from themselves. It is the same to them whether you warn them or do not warn them, they will not believe. They are not open to the truth. It doesn't matter if you tell them lies, it doesn't matter if you tell them truth. They are not able to perceive truth because they have decided, just like those who amanu have decided to at least try to believe, those who kafaru have decided to try to cover their ears, their eyes, their hearts. And as a punishment for that, God, just like it says in 10, in their hearts is a disease, that's of their own making. So God has increased their disease. Likewise in 7, 6 and 7, because they cover up the truth, God covers up because they're covering up their own eyes, God will help them along. He will set a seal over their hearts and their hearing and over their vision is a covering. It's as simple as that. It's why are there all these books on my shelves? And why am I told by all the wise professors and lay people as well that wisdom comes from reading all those books and never saying absolutely this one is true, that one is true, taking in all the different angles, the different perspectives, and not arrogantly saying this one is true and that one is false. Why can humans not come to a decision? Because they do not want to, because as soon as they come to a decision, the truth comes with responsibilities. And that will come clear in the succeeding ayat of this passage. Specifically, for me, a really crucial ayah, which I will hopefully talk about next lecture, which is 16. Those are the ones who bought straying, dwalala, for, or rather with, hud, guidance. And the verse goes on, but it's not as simple as, it's certainly not the case that they were born this way. But it's also not as simple as they had guidance, they had vision and perception, and then they lost it. But rather that they bought blindness, they bought wandering, dwalala, for guidance. The price of that permission to wander, to do whatever they want, cross all bounds, because they don't know the truth. Why not? Just do this or that. If I don't know what the truth is, then for all I know, this might be true. If I don't know what goodness is, then maybe this is good. They have that permission. They permit themselves to do whatever they want because they sold guidance. They couldn't have that if they knew, if they still knew, because again, they originally did know. They knew the truth. They perceived the truth. They would not have the permission. Their conscience wouldn't allow it to continually lie, continually cheat, and do wrong, and spread facade, corruption. It's very important to keep in mind how much is gained by selling guidance. It's, again, of course, it's a bad, as it says in the same ayat, it's a, they're